All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and continue to the I do section of our lesson today, where I'll be reading to you a section called East End from Knots My Yo-Yo String. As I read, I would like for you to listen for details that describe these important places. So think, why was this place special to our author? As well as how did the author explain this place using sensory details? So go ahead and follow along on the screen. And remember that we are focusing on how other authors recall important details of special places so that we can understand how to generate our own possible memoir ideas as well. East End. I am outside in the yard. There is the smell, sour, vaguely rotten, and then the sound. It is high pitched, but that is not the problem. The radio makes high pitched sounds too, and so does my mother when she sings to me. The problem is the loudness, a force as feelable as a blizzard. Every morsel of me shrivels and shakes. And even so, maybe I could stand it if only it would stop. But it does not and does not, and I cannot hear my own scream. My mother is running out to get me. This is my first memory of my first house. It was on Marshall Street in the so called East End of Norristown, Pennsylvania. Behind the house was a brewery, the Adam Scheit Brewing Company, and that I learned was where the smell and sound came from. The smell was hops used in the beer brewing process, forming a constant cloud about us. The odor was especially strong once a day when a horse-drawn wagon hauled spent mash down the alley that led from the brewery past our side yard. Then the alley became a sour, streaming stream from the drippings of the wagon's sopping cargo. The source of the sound was an anti-raid siren. It was propped on the roof of the brewery, hardly a stone's throw from our house. This was during the early 1940s. World War II was raging in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and air raid drills were a common practice in towns and cities throughout the land. While the siren's frightful wail seemed to come from everywhere, another frequent sound, a long, low drone, came from directly overhead. Many a day I looked up to see planes or airships, dozens, sometimes hundreds of them, moving in neat geometric shapes across the sky. Our house was red brick, flanking a block long row of red brick houses that ended at the brewer's alley. The sidewalk was brick also. We lived in an apartment on the second floor. The Princes, Mickey, Big Leroy, and Little Leroy, lived on the first floor and on the third. Each night they trooped through our quarters to go up to bed. The landlady lived in the adjoining house. Neighbor kids said she was mean. Stray balls that landed in her yard never came out. Luckily, for my father's baseball budget, she was nice to us. My father lobbed underhand pitches to me, and I regularly whacked them over the back fence, into the landlady's yard. My father, according to Marshall Street lore, was the only person ever to return alive from her yard, ball in hand. Unable to find a bat for a 4-year-old, my father bought a standard sized Louisville slugger, then put the saw to it. He presented me with 17 inches of hickory handle. Perfect. That stunted clubbish bat stands at a corner of my office today. It reminds me of how small I once was, and that the landlady's fence was both the first and last fence that I ever hit a baseball over. Over the fence out front, I sent something else. The gate facing the sidewalk was metal, and I used to grip those bars with my tiny hands and plant my feet and belt out "Jesus Loves Me" to the tuning to the turning, smiling passerbys. At some point during my brief singing phase, I acquired a baby brother, Billy. My mother tells me that because I then had to compete for her attention, I brought my performances inside to the living room and kitchen. The next house we lived in, we had all to ourselves. It was also a row house, but it had a front porch. It was deeper into the east end on Chestnut Street. I always remember the number 224 Chestnut because my grandparents lived at 226, the house next door. I wasn't allowed to cross the street, but I did roam up and down the sidewalk, and that led me to the vacant lot at the end of our row houses. When I think of that lot, I think of the weeds and the brown and blue broken glass. It became my first playground, my first ball field. Many of my days were spent there until I began school. I did not go to kindergarten, so my first taste of school was first grade at Gotwells Elementary. We learned to write the letters of the alphabet, then our names. I recall laboring over each pencil printed letter and the miracle of completing my name on the blue line paper, my first written work. I was destined to learn little else at Gotwells. We rented our house on Chestnut Street. My parents had been searching for a place to buy. When they got the chance, they took it, even though it meant transferring me to a new first grade in a new school. We were moving to the West End. All right, ladies and gents, we're going to pause here for just a moment, and we both Miss Mecca and Miss Gading, are going to model responses to these questions. What place was special? Why was this place special to the author? And how did the author explain this place using sensory details? So right now we'll pause the video, model those answers for you, and then we'll continue on in just a moment with the We Do section, again, reading through. All right, ladies and gents, for the We Do section, we'll continue with this story, Knots My Yo-Yo String, specifically with the story of the West End. Remember, we are going to be able to recall important memories of our own special places to generate our own possible memoir ideas. But for now, we're looking at how our author, Jerry Spinelli, did that. So again, please follow along on the screen here as I read West End, and then at the end, we will answer the same We Do questions together. The West End became more than my home and neighborhood. It became my new world. No Coonskid Pathfinder ever explored his patch of earth more thoroughly than I explored mine. The address was 802 George Street. Second house in from Elm. Another brick row house, another brick sidewalk. For 10 years, I would live there from ages 6 to 16. The 800 block was the last block on George Street. It was a dead end. Beyond the last house, the asphalt stopped. The 3-foot-high wooden barrier made it official. I learned that dead end meant two different things. To a grown-up, it meant stop, turn the car around. To me, a kid, it meant go, your territory starts here. Before the wooden barrier was the structured, orderly world of grown-ups, the neat grid of streets and houses that gave shape to their lives. Civilization. Past the barrier was the frontier. Climb over the fence or simply walk around it, as a car could not, and you found yourself in knee-high weeds. Then came the railroad tracks, then the woods, then the creek, pronounced crick in Norristown. This swatch of undeveloped land featured not one, but two dumps, plus a swamp, Bread Hill, the Spearfield, the stone piles, and a black and white pony. Who needed playgrounds? And lucky me, the portal to this kid-sized continent was the dead end of my new street named George. I spent much of the next 10 years in this houseless, streetless wilderness and in the park on the other side of the creek. Sometimes I was with others, sometimes alone. By the time the 10 years were up, I had caught a handful of salamanders, hit a home run, raced against my stopwatch, searched for the devil, kissed a girl, and bled from an attack of leeches. But I did not go to sleep on the frontier side of the dead end fence or wake up there or go to school there. And that was okay because the civilized side also had something that seemed expressly made for me and my playmates. Geographic features that appeared on no map, had no names, yet were intimately familiar to all kids in the neighborhood. Seen from above, they would appear as a second nameless grid overlaid on the public one. I speak of alleyways. To me and the neighborhood kids, the back of a house was more important than the front, and we happily roamed the alleyways that bordered our backyards. Alleys were sized to make us comfortable. With a running start, you could practically broad jump across some of them. In an alley, it was the car, not the kid, that was the intruder. Alleys were for sneakers and bikes and trikes and wagons. Alleys had no rules, no signs. Danger and parental interference were minimal. You could lie on your back in the middle of an alley, if you wanted to, and close your eyes for 5 minutes and not be run over. You could hang the frame of an old wooden chair from a telephone pole spike and use it as a basketball rim. In an alley, you could practice riding your new bike in peace, then ram it into potholes and get yourself thrown like a Bronco buster. You could check out other people's garbage cans if you wanted. If you ran away from home or planned to, you would go by alleyway. The network of nameless alleys mimicked the town's official layout. You could go anywhere. For all I knew, clear across the country. With the frontier and the park and the alleys available to us, you might think we would stay off the streets. We did not, of course. If it pleased us to get up a football game in the middle of the street or hide from seekers under parked cars, that's what we did. Because in truth, our territory was whatever we happened to be. Whichever side of the dead end we were on, whichever side of the door, we confiscated the turf and made it our own. And so, if we felt like resting, we would alight a small flock of birds onto the nearest front steps. Except for those at the house directly across the street from 802. For reasons too vague for words, we were afraid of the man who lived there. His front steps were never sat on, his sidewalk had never hopscotched, his doorbell never rung, his backyard fence never climbed. The truth was, he was simply a widowed barber who preferred to keep his shades down all the time. But try telling that to us. 10 years from 6 to 16, 10 years in the West End, 10 years of twin popsicles and Bonomo's Turkish taffy, high top keds, and a plaid cummerbund, Howdy Doody, and Willie the Worm and Uncle Miltree on TV Tuesday nights, salamanders and snakes and candy cigarettes, coal dust on the clothesline, baseball cleats swinging from my handlebars, Ovaltine in my milk, knots in my yo-yo string. All right, ladies and gents, just as we answered those questions and modeled for you during the I Do, we're going to look back at the West End story and answer these same questions.